And we'll give it just a few minutes. Let's see, I think everyone is in the group that they're going to be in, so we can go ahead and start. Okay, thank you for joining our session on collaboration during GPRA, or Government Performance Results Act reviews. I'm Marielle McKinnon with the Center to Improve Program and Project Performance, also known as CIPP, and I'm joined by my colleagues Hadley Moore and Carrie Wills, and they'll be presenting on their collaboration as reviewers during this GPRA review process. Okay, and so our agenda for today is going to be introductions, and then we'll have an overview of CIPP, and then we will be followed by our presentations about the GPRA data review process and challenges. And finally, we'll have some time to discuss or for any questions that you may have. Okay, so what does CIPP do? First, I'd like to provide a brief overview of what CIPP does on a larger scale. So we help OSEP advance the rigor and usefulness of evaluations conducted by or for OSEP-funded projects, such as the Parent Centers or eTech-M2, TA&D, PDP programs, and of course, SPDG. We provide evaluation support and technical assistance. We support OSEP in conducting midterm performance reviews for selected OSEP projects. We carry out data collection and analysis tasks to support OSEP's annual GPRA reporting. And we also report and discuss those results with OSEP program leads and budget service liaisons. In this SPDG review process, so we're going to provide an overview of it. It falls within the annual GPRA data collection work that we do. So with the SPDG review process, OSEP sends CIPP the SPDG grantees APRs, the annual performance reports. CIPP then reviews the data for each of the measures independently and then meet to discuss ratings and reconcile differences. The reviewers then rate quality and completeness of data reported for each measure. Reviewers summarize, reconciled, and aggregated results in a report and submit that report to OSEP. And CIPP overall follows a collaborative process to ensure consistency between reviewers and to provide OSEP with reliable and accurate results. So today, we will share with you how our reviewers collaborate when they review the GPRA data for the SPDG program. And first, we will have Hadley Moore, who's been with the Center to Improve Program and Project Performance for 8 years. Hadley has served as a SPDG GPRA reviewer for 5 years, and she'll discuss CIPP's process for reviewing GPRA Measure 1. Then we'll have Carrie Wills, and she's been with the Center to Improve Program and Project Performance for 7 years and has served as a SPDG reviewer for 2, and she will discuss CIPP's process for reviewing GPRA Measures 2, 3, and 4. We also have 2 additional reviewers for SPDG, and they couldn't join us today. So we have Laura Johnson. She reviews for Measure 1, and then Jennifer Schaff, who assists Carrie with Measures 2 and 4. So I will pass it on over to Hadley Moore so that she can share with you the collaboration of the measures, and followed by Carrie Wills.
Thank you, Muriel. So I am going to talk about evaluating Measure 1. And the process that we use for that is highly collaborative. It is 2 reviewers. It's actually myself and Laura Johnson, who Muriel just mentioned. We both have expertise in special education, professional development, and program evaluation. And we assess the extent to which the SPDG professional development initiatives that are selected for review utilized evidence-based professional development practices. And so we have to come to agreement on our consensus scores prior to reporting the results. So we need to agree on what the score is before the results are reported to Congress. we use the SPDG evidence-based professional development components rubric. So that's the same rubric that's available on the SIG network website. And that's the rubric that we use to assess the extent to which initiatives implemented evidence-based professional development practices. And then as an indicator of data quality, so that, people looking to see how well we're able to assess these things, our inter-rater reliability. So Laura and my inter-rater reliability prior to our consensus is calculated. And so that process of coming to consensus is pretty detailed and collaborative. And so I want to just sort of walk through what that looks like. So Laura and I independently score measure 1. So we both sit down with the report and the rubric and we score independently the entire measure 1. And then we hold a meeting and we discuss our ratings of each report. And we go back to the report and we have in-depth discussions on the information if we don't agree with each other. So if we've rated something differently, or if our ratings don't align with the grantee's original rating. And so the entire process can take several hours for each individual report between our independent reviews and then our meeting where we go back to the report as needed. And so our inter-rater reliability, and this was just this past year, so that this is Laura and I, is quite high. You can see across the different dimensions, just indicating that the way we're rating things prior to coming together for our consensus meeting is pretty well in line with each other. We have noticed, though, over the years that there are specific items or elements that come up sort of time and again as areas where either Laura and I don't agree with each other, or our rating frequently doesn't align with the grantee's rating. And so I wanted to just elevate some of these for informational purposes. And so the first one here is A1, and this is clear expectations are provided for PD participants and for schools, districts, or other entities. And the specific element that comes up as a challenge is the first bullet there. So description of expectations for PD participants. And so the challenge there is that that element is meant to be a description of what is required of the people that are participating in the training. So as an example, it might be that individual participants are required to attend 10 sessions. And so that's the information that they're looking for there. And that is a challenge that we see where sometimes we're getting a different type of information for that specific element. The next one that comes up is B4, and B4 is trainers. So the people who trained the PD participants are trained, coached, and observed. And the specific challenge that we see here is the bullet point that says identification of a training fidelity instrument used. And so here the challenge is that this really should be a measure that measures the extent to which the training is implemented as intended, including the content that's covered and how the training is delivered. And so that's really what we're looking for there. The next one I want to highlight for you is C3. And C3 is coaching outcome data are collected and analyzed to assess participant knowledge and skills. And so the specific element here that we see as comes up time and again as a challenge is related to feedback loops. So it's that last bullet there, which says description of how coaching outcome data are used as part of feedback loops among trainers, coaches, and coaching recipients. And so what we often see is that there'll be a description of how the data are shared with maybe one of those groups, but not all of those groups. And what we're really looking for here is a loop whereby the coaching outcome data are shared among these different groups of people and not just with one. So that feedback loop component. The next one is D3. And D3 is fidelity and student outcome data are used to inform the continuous improvement of the project in collaboration with stakeholders at multiple levels. And the bullet here, the required element here that comes up as a challenge is again the feedback loop. So again, just that like that real loop is what we're looking for, with feedback going to state, regional, local, community, and other agencies. And then the last one I want to highlight is E2. E2 is leadership systems are in place to build state level capacity and promote project sustainability. And the element here that we see as a challenge is the description of revising processes and procedures. And so it's that second bullet there. It says description and processes for revising policies and procedures to support a new way of work. And what we're looking for there is there are policies and procedures that go beyond the project. And so those are policies and procedures that might, for example, be at the district level or at the state level. And so that's really what that specific element is getting at. And that was my last area of challenge. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Wills.
Hey, everybody, thank you, Hadley. So I'm going to go over what we look at for measures 2, 3, and 4. So just to give a little refresher on what these measures are in case you don't have them memorized. Measure 2 asks about the percentage of SPDG initiatives that meet benchmarks for improvement in implementation of SPDG supported practices over time. And we only look at grants in their third year through their final year for this particular measure. And measure 3 gets at the percentage of funds used to sustain SPDG supported practices. So this includes grants in year 2 through their final year. And then the last measure, which is the newest measure, is measure 4, and that looks at the percentage of SPDG initiatives that meet their child outcome targets. And for this particular measure, we only look at grants in their final year. So first, Jennifer and I independently review the data from the APRs that are submitted by the grantees, and we discuss data quality and completeness relating to each measure. And we discuss and reconcile any concerns we have about differences in our responses, if we picked the appropriate measure, if we picked out the target data properly. And then we use the SPDG workbook to enter our final responses. And then that workbook is used to calculate numbers and percentages for the initiatives that met the target for each measure. For measures 2 and 3, we use the numbers to complete the reports that we provide to OSEP. And then for measure 4, for the child outcome measure, we review the data provided by grantees in their application and we give feedback to OSEP, but we don't actually include this measure in the report to OSEP because it's so new, they're still getting feedback about it. Next slide, Meryl. So consensus for our measures is similar to the process for measure 1. We independently enter information about each of the measures, and then Jenny and I come together to discuss what we entered. We look at things at like whether the grantee set a target, if actual performance data was entered in the program measures chart, and we record our results. And collaboration is critical in order to make sense of any unclear data. We both confirm that the aggregated data are accurate in order to reduce the likelihood of errors. And if we find that any of the data is entered in the wrong place, or if it's difficult to find in the APR, we talk through it. So there are some common, I'd say challenges, but things to think about among measures 2 and 3. So for the target, it should be appropriate and achievable. Grantees can discuss how to select or refine their targets with their project officer. So in this case, unlike measure 1, grantees set their own target for measures 2 and 3. So for measure 3, We look at whether or not the correct equation was used for the financial information by entering the numerator and denominator in the SPDG workbook and checking to make sure that the numbers are correct that are reported in the chart. We also look at whether or not all of the required data were reported, and for both of the measures, for 2 and 3, we don't calculate inter-rater reliability like measure 1 does, because measure 1, the data are more qualitative and the ratings can be more subjective, whereas for measures 2 and 3, we're looking at hard numbers, so it's more quantitative. So we don't need to do an inter-rater reliability. Then for measure 4, the child outcome measure, grantees should make sure to distinguish between the data for project versus program measures, because we find sometimes they don't distinguish between the two, and it's hard for us to pick out which measure is actually looking at the child outcome data. Grantees should also be consistent in their unit of analysis and denominator. So, for example, if the outcome you're looking at is the number of students participating schools identified as at risk for reading will decrease, then the denominator should be at the student level, not the school level. And some of the time, what we found is that grantees are reporting numbers at the school level, even though the data is being calculated at the student level. So those were all the considerations I had, and we want to just answer any questions that might come up. I'm not sure how long we have for questions. I wasn't checking time. But yeah, if anybody has any questions about anything we've gone over, or the collaboration process, or wants to pick our brains about anything, please speak up or enter something in the chat.
I just had a quick question. We were recently meeting with our federal programs officer and reviewing our GPRA data, and he suggested we kind of write a note with questions we had related to that. So is that's a process as well, that if we have questions on the worksheet or the Excel spreadsheet, who do we direct those to? Do we go through our program officer, or does it go directly to CIPP if we had questions related to some of the ratings on a GPRA?
Questions about specific CIPP ratings for the GPRA report?
Yes. Or comments on the report?
Meryl, what do you think?
We can check with Shauna, but I believe that would be something you would address with your project officer, first.
Okay.
But we can follow up to confirm that is the correct, process that you should follow. Any other questions?
I had a question. You mentioned that you start looking at projects in their 3rd year of funding, and I'm wondering, is that, like, I know for the worksheet we put our implementation year on at the top. So is it the year of funding, or because sometimes there's like a delay in getting started and a planning year, that sort of thing? Like, how is that 3rd year determined?
I'd have to check with Jennifer on that. I thought it was by year of implementation, but I could be wrong. So let me check with Jennifer about that, Amy.
Okay.
Good question, though.
And you all may have seen, but Hadley has dropped the SPDG evidence-based practices rubric in the chat if you're interested.
I just wanted to answer the prior question. I think it was Amy. It is the year of implementation, not the year of the grant. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So just confirming.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing the worksheet as well. Along with the resources, there are a lot of resources to help us, but this walkthrough is really, I find it really interesting and helpful to know where I bet sometimes we're even doing those things. We just don't report on it. Like the feedback loop might be something that's happening, but to make it explicit for reporting purposes is really helpful to know about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the question I get most frequently when I'm talking with grantees is about putting together measures on the student outcomes. Do you have any further thoughts, or people in the room have good examples to share as they've worked through that?
I guess I just kind of a question tied to that too. Ours had a math and reading outcome, and we got a comment back that we couldn't have two program for that we couldn't have reading and math as student outcome measures on program measure 4. And so like it just, but that was it. That's been that way for multiple years. So, but that was the first time we'd gotten feedback. So are we supposed to align it to only one program measure for program measure 4? And then do we just work with our project officer on that? Because he said to leave it as 2 for now, but if you could clarify if they're only supposed to be one outcome measured. And then our state has changed evaluation student assessment system. So that was also a challenge that we faced, is our student outcome data has changed during the 5-year cycle within our state. So if you have any suggestions for addressing that as well, if there's changes in your what data you started with versus what data you ended with.
So that one would not be for me because I only do measure 1. Muriel or Carrie, do you have any thoughts on that, or is that something we should bring back to the team?
I think we should bring that one back to the team, because I know for measures 2 and 3, we look at, we end up selecting one initiative to look at. And I thought it was the same for measure 4. We want to look back, we try to tie it back to the sampled initiative and say, the child outcome data is related to the initiative, like the reading initiative. And then we say it's measure 4 point something from the APR report. But I want to ask Shauna just to make sure.
Muriel, does it make sense if we have folks put their email address in the chat and then we can grab those out of the chat and follow back up with the answers to these questions?
Yes, and we are also recording, so we have captured in detail as well, and we can make sure we follow up with the proper guidance for you. But yes, if you would like to drop your email address in the chat, and that way we can make sure we have your contact information. Thank you. Great, got it. Okay, any other questions about our process that anyone would like to get clarification on, that we can make sure we get your answers, your questions answered? All right, have yours as well, Amy. Okay, it doesn't seem like there are any more questions. We're not due to switch over until 3:55, so I think there are, let's see.
Maybe we get a break, or
Yeah. Yes,
or maybe
you
there's
can.
yeah, I know that you also released recently some new I wouldn't say guidance, but tools, I guess, for supporting equity in your evaluation or some, if, I don't know if everyone knows about that, or maybe even have other tools from CIPP that you would want to tell us about. And, or we can take a break too, so.
Yeah, we can absolutely drop a link to that tool in the chat. Thank you for bringing that up. That's something that we did in the past year through our work for CIPP. We developed like a pretty short lit review / overview on the importance of incorporating equity into evaluations. And then we developed a rubric that teams can use like at the different phases of evaluation to make sure that they're considering all of the different aspects that need to be considered when incorporating equity. And so there are recommendations for things to consider at the planning phase, at the implementation phase, at data analysis, and then at reporting and dissemination. And it's going to take me a second to grab the link for that, but I will do that as soon as I stop talking because I can't do two things at the same time.
And yes, folks are welcome to go and take a quick break prior to our switch over into the other breakout session. I'm going to take a quick break as well.
That sounds great. We can all take a break, but thank you all for this presentation and for all the work you do in helping us with the GPRA review and evaluation. We learn a lot from it, both at the project level and at the program level. So appreciate it very much.
Thank you for joining today.
Yep. See you back in the room.